same time, we also have to pull back up out of that and think about, okay, big picture, and that's challenging. But I think that's a good pull out and okay, so big picture. What is something tangible that we can begin to do to awaken the I think that's what awaken the consciousness of this language and this behavior that we want to see happen. I think that's a good perspective. Joe.
Another practical way to add on to what John's saying is that we already have a weekly spiritual formation sheet, and we have a chapel app, so it's easy. I think there's 2 vehicles which you could easily add one blurb each week on something. Obviously there's 4 weeks in a month. Week 1 is always your sharing the grace story, and or however you want to do that. But there's 2 spots you could put something to increase the frequency that we already have in place. People have the app and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think exposure is just an issue. I think people don't hear it, they don't know it. You can ask people the mission statement and they know it. It's on the wall, like John was saying. Like we ask our volunteers, do you know the 4 outcomes? No one even has a clue what we're talking about. Like, oh, you remember that series that Pastor Jerry did? It was like 12 weeks long, and they spent 3 weeks in each. Like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. So I think we've talked about it at some points, but I just think people aren't really exposed to it, so they're not thinking about it.
What is Kenny? This is a good point. That's why I underlined it. I thought that was funny. Yeah. Tough crowd. What's holding us back organizationally from doing this? Like putting this up? Is it just like let's make sure we're clear on the verbiage, or?
In terms of timeline, yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is ever since you said a while back about common language, you're talking about the whole survey thing, and also the idea of repetition with the cycle we will be here, and all that kind of stuff. That hit us, pretty hard as far as, okay, we need to figure out a way to make it happen. So outside of getting verbiage together, the next step is to get something up on the wall in the atrium.
Okay.
And hopefully, if costs doesn't prohibit us, putting something in everybody's hand, they can walk away with and say, here are the, these 4 outcomes.
Okay, cool.
But I think outside of that, that's going to be like a one-time hit. Even the mission statement, it's on the wall, people notice it, new people will see it, but it will become part of the furniture. That's just kind of the way things go with decorations and things. But I like the idea of getting on the formation sheet, getting
bulletin. Is there a spot in our bulletin to put up?
We have tons of different communication outlets, but if it became part of our rhythm that on a regular basis I think you're right, people can articulate it, and even more so than articulating it, they're not being asked the question, how is this being played out in their own life? And I think it's really easy for us to create that rhythm, just by putting priority on it.
And when we do the outcomes, I think we have to do the behaviors too, because if you're not challenging people to be intentional in their circles and be present in different circles, is there saturation? If you just talk about the outcomes, they'll miss that whole acting on it part.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any debate here on that. Like, are we feeling lockstep there that we want to promote outcomes, but we can't assume behaviors?
Well, I'm confused. Isn't it the same thing? Like, a behavior that I'm doing is I'm sharing my grace story.
I'm taking pre-existing language of renovation, where Dwight is talking about these are spiritual formation outcomes that we desire, and that they lead, when you're forming in these outcomes, they lead to certain behaviors.
That was why we didn't land on doing both, because it did, even when I did it with my small group and we talked through these things, it got to be a little confusing with the verbiage that we're using, because they're somewhat duplicative. Even though I understand there are 2 different functions, it kind of tripped people up a little bit. So that's why I want to talk to you.
Yeah, we can clean it up. I mean, we're not married to that. I think we could easily say, what do we want to see in people's formation? How do we want them to grow spiritually? And what do we hope this leads to? I think it's a pretty clear, we could clean that up. But Linda.
Aren't the outcomes the intimacy with Christ, Christ-likeness, grace story, and giftedness?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like I hear it slanted a little bit different way, and I hear it kind of pushed over here. But that's what I've always thought it is, and that's kind of what we're trying to push down. I just want that clarification. It is definitely, those are the 4 outcomes when we have presence, proclamation, saturation, conversion, and we're asking them to have missional behavior towards those things.
Yeah, let me clear that up. That's not...
Not totally?
The outcomes that we talk about are we want people to grow in their intimacy with God.
Yeah, yeah.
We want people to be in Christ-like relationships with one another. We want people to be aware of their grace story. And we want people to awaken to their spiritual gifting. If, as that happens, we believe that there are certain outputs that will happen. Like, there are certain behaviors that develop out of people that focus on this. The byproduct is they will be present, they will give proclamation, they will saturate their geography, and they will lead some people to Jesus. That's the essence of what we're trying to cultivate there. If it is a language, like if it's a nomenclature thing, we can totally clean that up. No, I don't think that would be a problem at all.
I think it's half and half. I think it's partially that, but I think it also just is, I understand it because it's been articulated multiple times to me.
Right.
But people who haven't heard it for the first time, it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So it's a repetition thing too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Here's what I don't want to have happen though. I feel like one thing that's, and I just want to call it out a little bit. I don't want this to reside on the organization in mass exclusively. Because that's what's happening right now. We're talking about language going up on a board. We're talking about being in a bulletin. We're talking about very important stuff. But I do want to disseminate it back to you all and really, like, what are you doing to make sure that you're owning this in your domain of influence? And so it's both are super important. So I just feel better saying that, that if we walk away and the methodology is, well, we're going to put stuff up on the board and we're going to put a bulletin out there, and if that doesn't work, this has to feel a little heavier, I think. Not in a condemning way.
More for the exposure part. I think people need to see it.
Yeah.
But absolutely, it needs to be integrated with what we do in our ministries.
Well,
yeah.
One thing that I was thinking about in baptism is, it's not incorrect to say it's their video testimony, but if we've already, I'm kind of asking myself, okay, why haven't I changed that verbiage yet? Why not say preparing your grace story or learning to share your grace story? However we couch that.
Yes.
And then, even having, Benji's usually the one facilitating, all right, I'm turning your attention to the screens for our baptism grace stories. Just something that...
Yeah, it switches in the head.
Yeah, just anything to repeat that in the context of baptism, because I personally believe that public baptism is one of the first public steps of obedience in sharing your grace story. Just the act itself, and so I think that would be a great little tweak that wouldn't take anything but word processing.
Right, because otherwise, all we're hearing grace story is in the outcomes and not in everyday talk.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense.
Which it should be.
Yeah.
It's just and what Mike said. We could continue that discussion about how we ask those questions in a way that will facilitate these kinds of answers.
Okay, good. I want to keep continuing in the discussion, but I do want to point something out real quick. Prior to me putting the HTML... Oh, yeah. Great. Okay, thanks, Jim. So Kenny sent this to us last week, and I want to point it out to you. Kenny, if you would be willing to send it out to the group afterwards, I'd be grateful. So basically, Kenny's he's taken a swing at it, and that's really what we're asking people to consciously consider in their domain. I'm not certain that it doesn't mean that you're recreating curriculum necessarily, that you're scrapping everything. It's that I'm trying to awaken people to this is what we value, this is what we want to see develop in your life, and this is what we want to see you doing. And so the outcomes he puts in, this is the manual for Shine Leadership?
Volunteer training manual.
Okay.
Handbook.
Okay, so within the volunteer training handbook, you've got the 4 outcomes. Okay, so he gives his verbiage around intimacy with the Father, Christ-like relationships, knowing and using your gifts, sharing your grace story. Which I think we are beginning to get a rhythm of that communication out. I know that for me personally, like with the What's Next event, I know we're connected to that. I see it. I see this language starting to be utilized at a greater level. But at the same time, he's then going, there are certain behaviors that we want to see in you. And so these are the behaviors that we want to see lived out in your life. Presence. What does it mean to be present? Proclamation. What does it mean? Saturation, and then conversion. So again, taking nothing for granted, assuming your people don't know, and that's a common theme. People have said, I know about every man, woman, and child, these outcomes. Wow, that's like, I've never heard that before. It's like, well, you have, you just haven't heard it repeatedly yet. And I think that that's what we need to assume, is that we may have done a one-off on it, but when we look at our domain and the frequency of communication and what we're asking and what we're trying to call out of people, I think we need to be careful to not take that for granted. That's all. So as an example, I think this is really good. If you all in your ministry domains have already done something like this, please share it with us. I mean, I think that's where this helps us. You know, if Movi's done this, if Vintage has something like this, if, you know, I don't know, whoever's doing this stuff, like let's get these ideas in front of one another if we believe that this is a big part of how to mobilize our people.
Kenny, you were moving away from 5 faith skills to the 4 outcomes.
Right. So what we we're with the Orange curriculum, and we've done stuff with them. So they use the term 5 faith skills, which is very similar to our 4 outcomes. So we just decided to have a common language, and so we stopped using the 5 faith skills and just moved to the 4 outcomes. So really the idea was we just wanted to clarify what the win is. So like when you're talking middle school ministry, what is the big win? And we decided the 2 things were, we want students to begin to own their faith, which is the 4 outcomes, and we want students to begin to join God on His mission, which is the behaviors.
I have to say, and I know we love to debate, again, clarification and clarity around people understanding this stuff, but I really like that verbiage, the idea of, you know, the outcomes being owning your faith and behaviors being joining God on mission. And that to me is cool. I don't know how we can marry those two, but it's an explanation in a title. So.
Well, I can tell you, up to this point, it's whoever comes up with the idea first that gets out there, and then people.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, that's a great idea.
Well, one of the
How'd you think through that?
We debated a few months ago about the whole idea of common language, and does that mean that we all have to say the exact same thing? So, you know, this is what, you know, the content from Dwight says, so we all need to say the exact same wording, no tweaks. And Jerry helped to clarify that for all of us, just saying that no, that's not the case. You know, that it makes sense to modify it based on the context, because, you know, intimacy with the Father means something specifically when you're dealing with an adult population. But then how's that going to land for a high schooler or a middle schooler? You know, for men versus women, how do you go about approaching that?
Sure.
And you know, so we have that flexibility to tweak it, so long as you're not changing the core meaning behind what's being communicated.
And with that, one of the things to clarify is this handbook is for the adult leaders for the middle school kids. The middle school kids aren't reading this, you know what I mean? And Howie handled on the missional behavior page, you know, when it comes to behaving missionally, there are 3 things that we believe are our responsibility. While we don't expect these things to be present in the lives of middle schoolers, we can still talk about them, help them begin to think through these ideas, and create opportunities for them to see them modeled and begin to practice them. Realizing that you're talking about, you know, 11, 12-year-old kids here. You know what I mean? We're not saying, hey, go find somebody out there that's, you know what I mean? Because they got
if Wes Aaron was leading it, he'd be telling them off.
You know what I mean?
Right now.
Yeah.
Dan, tell him.
Bring a bus.
Sorry.
No, it's just wanted to point that out, you know, on how well I was impressed with how, you know, they thought through that. And it's not a realization, again, and that's why the open-minded questions, because, you know, presence, proclamation, saturation, conversion, we've talked about this before, but that's going to look, while we know there are some specifics we're kind of pointing toward, it's going to look different in different people's lives, you know?
Right.
I mean, someone who has a large family still living at home, or kids, period, their life is going to look a lot different than someone whose kids are grown or they don't have children. You know what I mean? From a responsibility standpoint, I mean, I have a responsibility for the gospel's sake to my kids.
Right.
And I'm not going to forsake that for anybody else's, you know, well-being. That is priority to me. Yes, others, but that. So that's just something to be aware of. But saying those kind of things sets people free and helps them with new eyes see the lives that they've been placed in.
Yeah.
So that they can represent. So
I definitely agree with you. What I do think there is value in, though, is the framework that we have been navigating through for the past few months. I feel like for the first time as an organization, with you all as pretty distinguished leaders in our church, I think we're finally starting to get on the same page. And I think that with that framework in mind, even though, you know, a 15-year-old may not ever know, here's the grid,
yeah,
you know, and here's what you need to be thinking. you need to know it, and you need to contextualize it. And I think that that's been a huge win for us, at least. I don't know if everybody agrees with that. I know for me personally, I've sensed less resistance and more like, okay, you know, like, I can, yeah, this is good. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's hard to control it, too. And it goes against the whole idea of a contagion. Like, just release it into the, you know, obviously we have parameters. It's not that, I don't know what I'm trying to say there other than, like, I'm not saying just, you know, assume everybody's just going to just go out and do this. You obviously have a conviction. You sense a leading on how to go about mobilizing people that God has entrusted you with. So you need to work within that, but within that, you try to get this out. So,
and Ryan, you were mentioning earlier about the importance of not just viewing this at the organizational level, but the importance of drilling it down to each context. And you know, so where are we interacting the most with individuals on a day-to-day basis? How can we really push that in? And I like what Mike's done with circle groups and saying that, you know, these groups are about provoking you to action. What is that action? It's the outcome. You know, it's the outcomes. It's the missional behavior. And so even within my own small group, I've been saying, okay, if we're all about provoking each other to action, what does that look like? And as we're meeting as a group, those are the types of things that I want to try and work through.
yeah.
So what other areas can we look to do that?
Yeah. No, I think it's good. I kind of thought of when you start, you should just bring some foster kids. Be like, what are you doing? Here's one. What are you? Here's one. It's like, now we're doing it. But you just make it very uncomfortable for everybody. No, this is really helpful. We've got about 5 minutes left. Is anybody pining or yearning for clarification on something in here? Like, man, I'd really like to talk about this a little bit more in the last few minutes that we have.
Okay. I know it's iffy, but we keep, you know, are we trying to lead people in something we're not doing personally? I think there's serious value in us taking one of these meetings and not like going person by person and step by step, but just opening it up and say, let's just talk personally about where we are in this and give everyone permission to go, to be honest, I suck at this, or, you know, I view this a little differently, and so here's how it works, but just so that there's that kind of open flow of, you know, because we keep like touching it, but not really talking much about it, you know what I mean? And it's okay that we have slightly different perspectives on how that plays out, but I just think there's value in that.
I do too. I'm just trying to facilitate the conversation, and I've tried to poke the bear a little bit, but I'm just realized like I can't. I mean, I could.
Like if we just picked
like,
a meeting, and I mean, if everyone you know decides, do we want to do that or not, and pick one of these times, and just that's what we're going to do, you know. If we don't want to, that's fine with me. But yeah.
here's why I think that this would be helpful if we participated in this. I think that one of the challenges that we face is, more than anything, it's interpersonal. That we are not super tight with one another. And I'm not saying that we have to be. I'm not, you know, we've got our own friends and we've got our own networks and we live our own lives. But one of the challenges that I've personally experienced in a larger church environment is it's just tough to know where you and your family unit, or whatever that looks like, where are you at in all of this? I mean, I personally feel like, man, if we sat down and said, I've been trying to do this, and I gotta be honest, like, here's what's happening, or, you know, I feel like my spouse is better at this than me, and here's why, or I just feel like it opens us up relationally to perhaps move us forward, even organizationally. I like the idea. I'm all for it if we want to do that. I think it would be very, very fruitful.
Maybe it's a lunch that we do and the tables are in a circle. So it's more...
I'm all for that too.
Just trying to get free food.
Well, I didn't think I was saying. It's a lunch on the Word of God. And we're fasting that day.
Jesus,
We pay for our own lunch.
Yeah.
I'm just saying sometimes when you sit around with people, even just the way we
idea.
position our seats, but or maybe it's a few weeks of doing that when we're in smaller groups, or I don't know what that looks like, but
I'm all for that. I've tried to poke the bear on that a little.
Well,
So
and if you don't want to say anything, you don't have to.
it's like an AA meeting. Pass. I appreciate your story.
Pass.
Pass. It's good. I think I upset John Coaches.
Uh,
I'm out of here. All right, it's 11:01, so we'll let you go, gang. Thank you so much for this. John and I will touch base about like next steps going forward. But if there's any significant reservation to that idea, just email John or I and let us know. Like that's creepy, or here's why.
It's creepy.
If not, we'll probably move forward with that idea in mind. Thanks, gang.